I'm Matthew Woods, host of Leading Out of the Woods, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you are listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. I am excited to be here with you all on this wonderful Tuesday, or it may be well into Wednesday, depending on where it is that you may be joining us around the globe. But hopefully you guys had a fantastic day today as we work our way through the week. Tomorrow's the middle of the week, so that's always a good thing. That means that the weekend is almost here. But I am excited to be here with you all today. As always, thank you for all the likes, the shares, the follows, all of your support, all the emails, and just thank you for everything, guys. We do what we do for you so we can bring you some amazing guests like we have tonight and some amazing conversations like we have tonight and every week for your listening pleasure. And of course, of all sorts of topics that pertain to the education landscape. So, today, I am really excited to welcome two amazing ladies that I got to meet and I have been following for a very long time. I am very appreciative of the work that they do. I'm appreciative of the topics and the people, the guests that they bring on. And they really just draw out so much from those guests. And so today, I would definitely love to welcome Jody Scissors and Allie Simon, the hosts of the Teacher Shift podcast. So, ladies, how are you today?
Doing great. And that
Doing
intro was such a vibe. I loved that. Yeah, really
awesome.
glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited that you guys are here. Like I said, I was honored to be able to be a guest on your show recently, and I know that episode came out, and I'm glad the timing worked out well because I know you that show released last week, and then your show is going to release this week. So it's almost like everything lined up for us to make this happen. And again, just an honor and a pleasure that you all are here today. And so today we're going to be talking about transitions. We're going to be talking about educator or teacher transitions. And if you all have noticed on the title, it says Recess is over, reinventing life after teaching. And as you know, like I mentioned to you, we cover all subjects, doesn't necessarily have to be ed tech, but anything that is current right now in our education landscape. And I definitely wanted to share with you the work that Jody and Allie are doing, not only for themselves in their transition, but also through the podcast. So, ladies, I would definitely love to go ahead and dive in. So, we'll start with Allie. Allie, if you can give our audience members a little brief introduction and what your context was in the education space and now in your new role that you've transitioned out of education.
Great. So I was a Spanish teacher for 7 years. I taught in various states. I'm a military spouse, so I moved a lot because of my husband's career. And eventually it led me to a place where it wasn't really sustainable to be in the classroom anymore. We had a child who got really sick. It really stretched us too thin. So I left at the end of that school year, took a brief break, and re entered the workforce. And I jumped into grants management. And that was the first transition that I made. It was something that I had dabbled in before, was working with another nonprofit. So I started off at a nonprofit. And then I fell into my role that I have now, which is a project manager on a youth apprenticeship grant, which I love the work that I'm doing now. And I will say, I got the job through a connection that I had at my child's school. And so I really think, teachers, we are always active in our own kids' lives, and sometimes it literally pays off. So that's my story.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing. How about yourself, Jody?
Yeah, so I was a teacher for 13 years, mostly at the primary level in Spanish immersion. And I, was like Allie, like I went into it, thought it was going to be my career for the rest of my life. And then throughout the years, I just wasn't comfortable with the challenges I was getting. I wasn't in a creative enough space. And so eventually I got to a point where I decided, the classroom is not the right choice for me. It's not the right choice for my family. It's not the right choice for my creative endeavors. And so I left with a little bit of, I guess you would say, not a plan other than I was like determined to be in a creative space. And when I was interviewing and looking for places, I knew that I wanted to be somewhere in the arts, whether that's visual, performing, music, arts. And I have landed myself there, which eventually got me to my own, building my own company, which is Paper Planes Ed. And I do arts integration consulting with arts institutions.
Excellent. Wow, that is wonderful. Well, I love to hear that. And obviously, we know what has happened, obviously, since COVID and, a lot of things happening within the education space, and things have been a little bit more difficult and more so in some places. But the overall feeling is, there's something wrong. There's an issue there, has been brought to light. Definitely trying to work through it and work our best. And I know, sometimes like you said, transitioning might be the best step, not only for one's personal health, but just mental health, all of that, and just, for one's creativity and purpose and so on. So I want to ask you, as we get, dive into this conversation, and we'll start with Jody first. Jody, at what moment did you realize that your path in education was kind of already leading you elsewhere? I know you talked a little bit briefly right now in your introduction, but what led to that moment?
It was a hard realization, I can start with that I knew something was wrong about 6 years in, and I couldn't really determine or pinpoint what that was, and it took a lot of really, really tough work on myself, the help of counselors, the help of peers, the help of family members to really unpack what I was feeling because my feeling for working with children didn't change. Like, I loved being with kids, I loved being with students, but still, I was walking away unfulfilled. And Allie and I talk about this on the podcast is that I think what it came down to was unfulfillment. I was my career was unfulfilled by just really rigid programming, scripted curriculum, and having teachers regurgitate content to basically fulfill the needs of standardized testing. And to me, that was not what really made learning enjoyable or memorable or or have, kids be successful in the classroom. So that those elements of the way that education has been built over the years in the states that I've taught in, led to career unfulfillment, and, I had to grieve a lot, in order to come to that realization that I needed a change.
Absolutely. And that's something that is that I've been hearing a lot of, and especially because of that, mainly like state testing, those components there. And you feel like you really lose that freedom of being able to take risks in the classroom, to be able to be creative, like you mentioned, doing things a little bit different, because now it seems like everything is really more micromanaged and everything is really geared towards those numbers at the end of the year at the state results, and then from there, because it's based on funding, of course, then you get ratings and so on. So I completely understand where you can be coming from, being 17 years in education and seeing a lot of that. And even more so now, it just seems like it has been something that has been emphasized a lot more. So, Ali, how about yourself? Can you share a little bit about that moment that led, you into this new trajectory and this new career path?
Yeah, so unlike Jody, she had some time to really process, the exit and figure out where, that she was going to leave teaching. My exit was really abrupt. This healthcare happened with my daughter in March, and I finished that year. And it was with a heavy heart that I left at the end of that school year. I decided with my husband and I talked about it. And I took a break from teaching. I actually stayed involved in my school. I still kept coaching speech and debate, which is something I had discovered at the last few years of my career that I loved doing. And I really wasn't ready to let go, to be honest. Like, I loved teaching, but the logistics of it were not feasible for our family. Unfortunately, it's really hard to find childcare for children really early in the morning when you're a high school teacher. Like sometimes you have to report to school by 6:45 a.m. And so honestly, I would say logistics were like our biggest factor. But when I decided to return back to work after about a year break, um, I realized I was looking at non-teacher jobs because I needed to make it work for my family. So I was like, okay, what space can I go into that would be would still fulfill me? Because I still had that want to like do something purposeful, to want to help people. And so I tried to figure out what I could do that I was passionate about besides teaching. And so that actually led me down the path of immigration justice. And the first job that I had was managing micro grants that were focused on immigration justice. And that was a passion of mine that I discovered a few years earlier, um, doing some volunteer work with migrant children. And so I decided to apply to this job, this grant program. They offered me the position, which was fabulous because I was really nervous going back into something different other than teaching. And so that led me down this new path of grants and then project management. But ultimately, I had to find something that I knew I could really pour into besides teaching because I did miss it a lot.
Absolutely. No, and I get that. And we're going to get to that question, but you kind of, in your answer, you kind of created a nice little segue for what I want to ask you next, because I know that we talked about, kind of the cause and where you saw that fork in the road moment where you said, hey, you know what, I need to go ahead and change my path and go down this path instead of where I'm headed. But now I want to ask about that support, after deciding that you're going to leave teaching. One of the questions that I want to ask you is what resources or networks did you reach out to or did you look into to go ahead and help you into this transition into your new roles? So we'll start with Ali first, and then we'll move on to Jody.
So I guess I wasn't in the mindset of like making a teacher transition when this was all happening. It was more just like survival mode. But as we've spoken before in our podcast, I'm a really social person. So I'm always just jabbering away about like what's going on in my life with people that I meet. And I I initially felt like my best bet to transition was to try to look for something similar to what I might have done before. Like who's going to hire a former teacher? I thought it was going to be really hard to get a job. So I'd actually previously had taken a 1-year fellowship working for a Jewish nonprofit in DC for a year in between teaching. And I thought, okay, let me start there, right? Something that I've already done before. So, sometimes teachers take breaks or they do something else. This is when I was finishing up working in graduate school. And that was what I leaned into was I looked for nonprofit work because I thought I've done this before. Hopefully someone will see that not only was I a teacher because I was nervous that they would see me only as that, but I had worked at another nonprofit. But the other thing that I did was I put myself out there and I would talk to people about, oh, I'm looking for a job. Oh, I've applied to this job. If you hear of anything, let me know. And at the time, I was living in Washington, D.C. That's where I met Jody. And so DC is all about connection. I mean, that is one of those cities where it really, really is who you know. And truthfully, I think the world does work like that. So put it out there, like put it out in the world if you're considering a transition. And that's what I did. And that's how I ended up hearing about the opportunity for the job that I'm in now. So I think just leading into what I knew and and physically networking, which I know a lot of us don't do that, but that's my forte is like talking with people in person. I think there's so many amazing online communities now that people can be a part of, including listening to Teacher Shift podcast. But there's a lot of resources that I truthfully wish I knew about back then, but it just wasn't on my mind.
Absolutely. No, and I agree with you on that. I know when we spoke on the podcast, that was something like I mentioned, like LinkedIn has been huge for me. And just again, really understanding, just putting myself out there. And like you said, what am I really good at? What do I want to lean into? And then putting that out really gives you a lot of opportunities, gives you a lot of traction, a lot of attention. And like you said, you start building those connections. And then, but I do really also enjoy that in real life approach, being able to connect with people in person. something that is important too as well. So I really love what you shared there. So Jody, how about you? Let us know about your experience and what were some of the resources that you used or, some of that support that you had within your transition.
Yeah, so I would say my initial support started with my inner circle because once I started getting those big emotions, those big feelings, I pretty much wear my feelings all the time. I don't really hide much. So my inner circle knew that something was up. And so I just had to talk it out with them first. And then from there, my inner circle started connecting me with other people. So expanding my network. And through that, that's when I started to reconnect on LinkedIn. And I had a really good mentor that told me, just go out there on LinkedIn and be the expert in what you know. Like, don't go on there and be someone else. And if you're having a little bit of an identity crisis, really just have some moments of self reflection to decide what is important to you. What are you good at? What are your skills? And so I leaned into that. I knew that the arts were something really special to me. I was always that creative teacher that kind of think outside the box teacher. And I was also really good at technology. I was always a technology liaison, or I was an early adopter. And so I leaned into those areas, which is basically what I'm doing now, which is a hybrid of the arts and technology, digital learning. So I really relied on my people and LinkedIn, and then just a lot of dedication and perseverance to revising my resume, tailoring it, and just applying for as many jobs as I found were going to make me happy or fill my bucket. Now, like Allie, we've uncovered a lot of ways to transition that are probably a little more efficient than what we did because we weren't listening to podcasts for support. We did not have resume services, recruiting. Like that wasn't even something suggested to us. And so now that we've interviewed people, we're thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I would have had this roadmap. But when we make our next move, whatever career move we make next, we will surely be using these resources.
That's great, and that's wonderful, and that's what it's all about, the experience, and I think also through your podcast, that's the when I listen to it, when it comes out, I'm always learning something new, and it's always great to hear the stories, but also just how the resources are shared, and then I'm thinking to myself, I was like, "Wow, why didn't I ever think of that?" Or, that's something that's brand new, and a lot of things are just popping up, and as we see, there is a need for that too as well. You've got the career coaches, you've got resume writers, you've got all sorts of services now to help you to get to where it is that you want to be and where you want to go. And, oftentimes when I first started working, I was like, I had never even heard of that at all whatsoever. But, it's something that is out there now because of that demand. So I want to ask you, Jody, and I'll start with you now that you've transitioned or, in your initial transition, I want to talk about, and it's something that we kind of talked a little bit about, and it was one of your shows too that it was mentioned where we struggle with that teacher identity. So what are some ways, Jody, that you had to work through kind of redefining your professional identity outside of the classroom?
Yeah, that was a tough journey, but um I'm still a teacher and I still identify with that. And I had to just come to terms with the fact that this is who I am. Whether I am in a classroom or I am with a family or I'm in a corporate workplace, wherever I am, I just have this innately in me even before I became a teacher. I just have great empathy and compassion for people in general. I just want to take care of others. I want people to learn and reach their the biggest potential that they can possibly reach. I'm also super organized person. My family knows that I like a calendar. I like things put in place. Um, and I'm a multitasker and I can stand in front of a crowd and sing and dance and be silly, but I can also be serious in front of assessment or something serious. So uh I struggled with like who am I if I'm not a teacher? But the reality is I am. that's just who I am. I have a different title now, but all the elements of being a teacher, and Allie and I have talked about this today, is that you're a communicator. You are an early adopter of things. You just kind of have this. You have your hands in a lot of things, and you're good at a lot of things, and that's just one of the perks of being a teacher.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And how about you, Ali? Tell us a little bit about your experience with that.
So I struggled with that for a really long time. I feel like I still struggle with that because I do miss teaching. And it's such a big part of your identity when you're a teacher. And I mention this a lot, but I'm a military spouse and I really see a lot of connections to like when veterans leave military service. That's such a big part of who they are. And I think it's a similar identity crisis that we go through when we leave the profession. But I agree wholeheartedly with Jody that once a teacher, always a teacher. And it's in your heart. It's going to be a part of you no matter what. But it doesn't have to define who you are necessarily. It's just a piece of the puzzle, right? It's just a piece of who you are. You're going to carry it with you for the rest of your life. And for me, it brings so many positive things to my life. Like I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning and I love teaching. And so I take those opportunities when I find them in my everyday life.
Excellent. I love that. And I think that's so important. And I think, a lot of times what I hear on social media and people that are teachers, educators that are looking to transition, it's just that fear of this is the only world that I've known for this long. This is what I'm good at and this is what I've done. And they don't realize, like Jody, you mentioned, as an educator, you're an excellent communicator. You can organize, you're a multitasker, do all of those things. And they don't see themselves as that. And oftentimes I believe it's that imposter syndrome kicks in severely because they're like, well, I know I can't do that. But you are doing it. You're just not seeing it in that kind of maybe professional setting or in the way that it's worded, on LinkedIn as far as, a job description and things of that sort. So I think, like you mentioned, having those resources available where you've got, resume help or you've got either career coaches or actually the guests that are on your podcast give so much wonderful free advice. So I highly recommend that you do listen to the Teacher Shift podcast because all the guests are amazing and you're definitely going to take some nuggets that you can sprinkle on to what it is that you're doing or planning on doing because the resources there are great and wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing that. And, because I think that's very important. Like myself, like you said, being in the classroom, for 11 years, honestly, I said, well, I'm going to retire in the classroom. I'm not going to do anything else. I don't want to do anything else. I don't want to be in a principal or an admin. I just want to be in the classroom. But then this opportunity came up and it's like, wow, okay, I'm not in the classroom. And for a while, I did struggle because it's like, oh, I'm missing my kids. I had my 30 kids and we would be doing this and so on. And it took a while to make that adjustment to know that, wow, I'm affecting more kids in a way where now I'm building relationships with the teachers that are on those campuses, and that was something great. But that's another kind of layer to that experience and expertise that you get to put in your tool belt. So as you move on from role to role, I mean, like I mentioned, improvise, adapt, and overcome. You learn a lot of those tools and through that experience. So that's great. So let's go ahead and I want to talk to you all about your podcast. Like I mentioned, definitely is a must listen. I listen to it every week. Show comes out and I am ready to go. I'm there usually because I have an order. It'll be like Wednesday morning or sometimes mid morning. And I'll be like, okay, I got my fix. But just the conversations that you have, the guests that you have been amazing. So, Allie, let me start with you. How did this idea come up of Teacher Shift?
So, I hope that Jody and I's story is the same because I was thinking about it. I was like,
I'm like waiting for you to tell the
okay.
story.
So we were sitting on a park bench. Our kids were playing in the playground. This is actually during COVID, where we two teachers had former teachers had come together to organize a play group for our kids, so they weren't isolated during the pandemic. And I've been having this idea, like, do you think people would listen to a podcast about people who used to be teachers like us and that they've gone into other careers? And Jody was really intrigued by the idea. She's like, I think that they would. And we kind of talked it out a little bit, but it wasn't until a couple months later that we connected again and decided, all right, like let's do this. So Jody, I don't know if you want to add anything to the
Yeah.
story because I was like, did I get it right?
Well, the first thing is I think Allie has a voice for radio. And you do too, Fonz. Like when I listened to your episode for us, I was like, oh my gosh, Fonz should be like one of those people that reads books on Audible. Like I could listen to your voice all day. And same with Allie. So I'm sitting there like I work in the arts, I work in media production and content. So we're talking with Allie, and I'm thinking like from the digital side, like, oh my God, Allie's voice is so good. And I love the way that she talks. And I'm techie and I think I can make a podcast and I think I can do the software. So it was a merge of like, ideas, but this combined passion and the skills that we have together to be able to make it happen. And we started it when Allie moved out of DC. And so like we were there in a park bench where it kind of came to where the idea came together, but she had moved out of state. And by that time we were like, okay, let's do this. And you know what? We're hundreds of miles apart, but we're making it happen.
Nice. I love it. And, and that's all it takes is just an idea to come together. And one of the things that I love about podcasting, obviously, is just the storytelling aspect. So I am glad that you guys decided to do this because it's a story that needed to be heard. And obviously, it's a story that led to the tremendous success that you're having because the guests that you have are just amazing former educators that are, now business owners. You've had edupreneurs, entrepreneurs, you've got all. And I know, some of those are the people that you met in real life at South by Southwest. And, just making those connections and sharing those stories and amplifying. I think what you do, and like I mentioned earlier in the pre-chat, like your dynamic is great. Your voices are great. And I just absolutely love the work that you're doing. So I want to ask you, now that you were talking, and I know it was formerly known as the Great Teacher Resignation. Now, you rebranded, they did Teacher Shift, which the rebrand is amazing. I love it. Love the setup. The media kit is wonderful, the colors and all of that. But I want to ask you, and we'll start with Allie. Allie, now that you've been doing the podcast for a while, what are some, maybe key moments that you feel that, you and Allie, I mean, I'm sorry, you and Jody doing this podcast have made a significant difference within our education space because it's still an education podcast, for those educators that would like to transition. So, what have you seen? What have you experienced? If you maybe have a, success story that you'd like to share, that would be great.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this recently. We interview guests and we hear from our listeners as well. But I think we've had one repeat guest, a couple, and Adam and Ashley McLean, and they were both teachers. And I think nothing really hits you more than two people that were teachers and they both transitioned out and hearing their different stories and getting to know them. They're probably, I feel like our most loyal listeners also. I want to give them a shout out. But they like hearing their stories and how they really connected to the podcast just resonated so much with me to hear both of their journeys. And I think it's stories like that when we get to hear from our listeners, and these just happen to be listeners that are guests, but we get to hear from them and they tell us like your podcast really, really helped me, or I really felt like I was the only one who had those feelings, who felt guilty, who felt, scared, who didn't know what to do. It's just so reaffirming that this work is so important and that we want to keep doing it for the people out there who, they don't, there's not a space always when you're uncertain about things. And so we want to be that place where it's like safe to talk about taboo topics like leaving your career in teaching.
Love it. How about you, Jody? Any experiences or stories that you'd love to share about the impact that both of you have made through Teacher Shift?
Well, we have the impact in terms of data and analytics, but I have to say it's the personalized notes that we get that say, thank you for validating the way that I was feeling. Thank you for giving me hope or giving me encouragement to work on my resume or even just elevate their career within a school district. But, she mentioned Allie mentioned Adam and Ashley, and we have had a relationship with them based off the podcast. And it's extended for me into my work life where I now am working on a project with them in the digital learning space because we established a relationship through the podcast, but now we have a professional relationship too. And I love that it's a place to network with others. People are always contacting us to say, "Hey, I need help," and I'm like, actually, we have a lineup of guests that can also help too. And I like being kind of this vein to get to widen people's network.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And that's really what it's all about, and that's the mission of Maya Tech Life as well, connecting educators and creators one show at a time. And I definitely see that with you at Teacher Shift. What you are doing is really just connecting those educators or, now educators that want to transition. But with the amount of guests that you've had and the quality of guests that you had, I think that is such wonderful work that you guys are doing. And it's really exciting. Like I said, week in and week out, I'm just there and I'm like, hey, I am ready to go. All right. So we've got Thomas here. Thomas, one of the co founders of Eduate, is here. It says it's great for teachers to have hope in something else. It's really important. So thank you, Thomas. Thank you so much. Also, Thomas, for being a listener and a supporter. So, Thomas Hummel from Eduade, thank you so much. All right, guys. Well, it has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. I mean, honestly, I could be talking here for hours with you and just picking your brain and going back and forth. But before we wrap up, I always love to end the show with the following three questions. So if you're familiar with the show format, hopefully you guys are. And I know I put those, always put those questions in the calendar just to not surprise guests. But here we go. So this time I'm going to go ahead and start with Jody first. Jody, I want to ask you, as we know, every superhero has a weakness. And in this case, Superman's greatest weakness was kryptonite, where it just, folded him over, made him weak. So I want to ask you right now, in the current state of education, from what you are seeing, what would you say would be your current edu kryptonite?
Not taking care of teachers. I think there needs to be more attention to their needs, their wellness, and to ensure that they have sustainable workloads so they can do what they came to do, which is teach children.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Great answer. Ali, over to you. What would you say is your current edu kryptonite?
I really want to agree with Jody, but I feel like I have to give a different answer. So, in addition to not supporting teachers, I think that we really need to reframe the teaching profession and teachers. We see them as only being teachers for their entire career, and we need to see them more as people. We need to humanize them more and realize that they have different needs and that we can value them and say, thank you for being a teacher, but you're also valued in another space too.
Love it. Love it. Great answers. Great answers. All right. Ali, for this next one, we're going to start with you first. If you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
I feel like I should say teacher centered, but I'm going to go ahead and say that teachers are superheroes. I think that goes along with the theme of the questions that you're asking us, and we need to really lift them up and praise them for who they are.
Absolutely. Great answer. Jody, how about yourself? What would your billboard say?
Mine would say, spend time with the people you love.
Love it. Great answer. And it really helps in so many ways and it just really goes, very far. You're absolutely right. I would just kind of add to that, just be present. Oftentimes that is so important. So thank you so much for sharing that, Jody. All right, last question, ladies. This time I'm starting with Jody. Jody, if you had to author a book starting tomorrow, what would your book be about?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. For some reason, like the audio got weird. Well, I've authored a lot of books. I'm not going to mention those
Okay.
titles uh, yet, but I think it would be called Teacher Shift.
I love it. I love it. I would definitely buy that book for sure. Absolutely. I could.
Allie, I stole yours. It's ours. It's collective.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's collective, and I would say, who am I if I'm not a teacher? I think that's another
Boom.
great title
Ooh, oh
that
my
Yeah.
really goes
gosh.
into what we
Yeah.
talked about today.
Yes, ladies, I got it here. It is permanent. You guys definitely need to make that because those are some amazing titles for sure. New York bestsellers, definitely. And I know I would definitely want an autograph copy. But thank you, ladies, so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, really, for the joy that you bring me. As you know, this is a passion of mine. And like I was mentioning to Jody, I pre-chat is like, man, this Mondays and Tuesdays fill my bucket for the rest of the week. And this has, really taken me over the top. And I'm just really excited. So thank you so much, ladies, again, for giving me the opportunity to be on your show. And thank you for being guests on my show. I really appreciate speaking with you and just hearing more about the work that you're doing and amplifying your voices. So for all our audience members, please make sure that you visit Teacher Shift and make sure you follow them. You'll definitely see all of that on the show notes. All the links will be there. Connect with Jody, connect with Allie, and definitely every week tune in because you are definitely in for a treat as far as the guests that Jody and Allie interview on Teacher Shift. Amazing. And of course, their experiences and then the resources that they share are definitely also very valuable. So thank you, ladies, from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Fonz.
Yeah.
You're
Thanks for
very
having us,
well.
Bonds.
Yes, you're very welcome. And for all our audience members, those of you that were watching live, thank you so much. I really appreciate you all. And for those that are going to be listening to this on the replay, as always, thank you so much for all of your support. Please make sure that you visit our website at myedtech.life, myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and the other 245 wonderful episodes with educators, creators, founders, edupreneurs, entrepreneurs, where you can take some knowledge nuggets and sprinkle them onto what you are already doing great. And please make sure that you visit our YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up, give us a like. We want to get to 1,000 subscribers. We're at about 600. So please make sure you help us with that mission. And also, if you'd love to be or contribute to our mission of our podcast, visit our merch store, guys. We've got some sweaters, we've got some caps, some swag there, and everything that you purchase goes back to the show so we can bring you some amazing conversations week in and week out. So thank you guys as always. And until next time, my friends, don't forget, stay techie.